Yeah, warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. As mentioned on the note that went out, we've moved today's class early in the morning. The idea is to do our learning before midday, and it's in line with the restrictions related to the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av being the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, the day where we practice certain restrictions as a sign of mourning. One of those being that we don't study Torah, at least not Torah that is not associated with the specifics of mourning or the particular tragedies of the day of Tisha B'Av. And so we're doing today's lesson while it's still morning. So last week I had the privilege of starting off this book, so to speak, with you, the laws that we refer to as Yisodei HaTorah, the foundations of Torah. As we introduced it then, and as the Rambam will follow this process for each of his sections of law, he lists a number of mitzvot from the Torah that are being elaborated on. Chapter 7, which we learned yesterday, began to elaborate on the mitzvah of our faith, the necessity to listen to prophets, and the associated mitzvah not to test them, which we'll come to as well. Now, as the Rambam elaborated in chapter 7, he gave us an idea of what type of personality a prophet was, how that individual had to really master themselves to be absolutely of pure thought, intention, and behavior. We spoke about how they received prophecy, and he contrasts the general experience of prophets with that of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe's prophecy, Moshe as an individual, is a standout from all other prophets. And today we continue on with the uniqueness of Moshe's prophecy, not so much in the way that he experienced it, which we spoke about yesterday, but in how it really sets him up as the ultimate prophet. And by virtue of this, although this is a short chapter with only 3 halachot, I mean, they're slightly longer halachot, but it's only 3 halachot, and it's a relatively short chapter. It's really the basis of our understanding and acceptance of the veracity of Torah, because we're going to refer to Moshe's prophecy. What was Moshe's prophecy after all? Right? The Torah is the 5 books of Moshe, because these are the words of Moshe's prophecy. So how do we know it's true? The Rambam doesn't pose that question per se, but in a sense, really the clarifications in this particular chapter give us a very solid understanding of how we know that is true. So we continue, as I said, with looking at Moshe as a prophet and the uniqueness of that. Begins with chapter 8, first halacha. Moshe Rabbeinu lo ha'aminu bo Yisrael mipnei ha'isa she'asa. The faith that the Jewish people had in Moshe was not the result of the incredible miracles that he performed. She'hamaymin al pi ha'isa yesh b'libo doifi. Because anybody whose faith is based on miracles that one performs always leaves within one's heart the possibility of doubt. Because it's possible to do miracles or make signs through the mediums of magic and other types of sorcery. And all the miracles that Moshe performed during the Jewish people's time in the desert, he did it out of necessity, not to prove himself as a messenger, as a prophet of Hashem. So, for example, but not to prove his capacity as a prophet. So, for example, it was necessary to drown the Egyptians, so he split the sea and they drowned within the waters. The Jewish people needed food in the desert. He was the one that brought down the manna. They were thirsty. We needed a drink in the desert, in the wilderness. So he split the rock that produced water. Then he have this congregation of Korach and his rabble-rousers. They lead a mutiny against Moshe, and he has to put a stop to this. What happens? So he causes the land to open up, and it swallows up these people. An incredible miracle, not to prove his veracity as a messenger of Hashem or as a prophet, but out of necessity. Similarly, all the other miracles that Moshe initiated, like the plagues in Egypt, are not the cause for our belief in Moshe as a prophet. So what then is the basis of our faith in Moshe? And here he says, here the Rambam reframes for us the entire Sinai experience in a way, because he tells us that more than anything, our experiencing revelation at Sinai was about confirming to us Moshe's veracity as a prophet, and therefore everything that he communicates to us. Because what happened when we stood at Sinai? Our own eyes saw, our own ears heard. And of course, he's borrowing the phrases here from the Torah that we're actually going to read in this week's Parsha, and he's referring to the people of his generation that could actually say, physically I saw, physically I heard. What did they see and hear? They saw the fires, they heard the thunder, saw the lightning. And then amidst all of that fanfare, what did they see? They see Moshe entering into this dark cloud, and they hear Hashem's voice communicating to Moshe. And the Jewish people themselves heard that voice of Hashem calling out to Moshe. Go and relate the following to the Jewish people. And this is what the verse means in the verse that we'll read actually in the parsha of the current parsha of Etchanan. Panim b'panim divrei Hashem imay, that Hashem spoke to Moshe face to face. V'nemer lo yasavesenu koras Hashem es habris hazayis. The verse says, Moshe tells the people, know that Hashem didn't make this covenant with your ancestors, but with you. And where do we know this from? That it was the Sinai experience from which we take the absolute proof in Moshe's as the prophet, that leaves no shadow of a doubt that he is the ultimate prophet. How do I know that that is the moment that we look to? Shenemar, as the verse says, as Hashem had already predicted, I will come to you in the thickness of the cloud, and the people will then hear as I speak to you. And as a result of that, they will believe in you, Moshe, forever. And from we can deduce that until that point where we witnessed Hashem speaking to Moshe, the faith, the trust that the Jewish people had in Moshe up until that point was not an immutable trust, but it's a type of faith that still allowed for some level perhaps of suspicion and doubt. But I'm saying something incredible over here, that even though they witnessed Moshe bring about all the plagues in Egypt, split the sea, brought them food from heaven, water from a rock, that was not enough for them to trust, at least beyond the shadow of a doubt, that he is the messenger of Hashem. What establishes Moshe absolutely beyond the shadow of a doubt as representing and sharing Hashem's word as the ultimate prophet was the moment when they themselves witnessed Hashem speaking to Moshe at Sinai. Second halacha, nimtu ele sheshulach lehen heim ha'edim al nuvo'asei shi emes ve'ein tzarech la'asei lehen ois acher. So what turns out then is that those who witnessed Moshe as a prophet, that is what gives them their faith in Moshe, and they do not require any further miracles to prove Moshe's status. Because Moshe and the nation at the time stand just like two witnesses that testify to the same, seeing the same thing. Because each one stands as a witness to the other. For example, right, if myself and you are standing on the street corner and we see I don't know, an accident, and we have to then go and testify about it. I don't have to convince you about the facts of it because you yourself saw it. You don't have to convince me because I myself saw it. We might have to share our version of the story, what we saw with others, but we don't have to prove it to each other. And that's what they're saying. The Jews that witnessed Moshe receiving prophecy from Hashem don't need Moshe to further prove that he's a prophet. They saw him, they witnessed him receiving prophecy. Similarly, Moshe, all the Jews, they testify after they've experienced the Sinai moment. Moshe no longer has to do any miracles to prove further that he is a prophet. And this is why we find in the first experience of prophecy that is recorded in the Torah for Moshe, at that time when Hashem gave Moshe miracles that he could perform in Egypt in order to convince the Egyptians and the Jews that he in fact was a messenger from Hashem. And what does Moshe respond? This, by the way, this is referring to the encounter at the burning bush. And if you remember there's a long negotiation going on. Hashem wants Moshe to go and confront Pharaoh, and Moshe is hesitant. And furthermore, Moshe says, you're giving me miracles, right? You're giving me these wonderful tricks. Take a stick and throw it to the ground, it will turn into a snake. Take some water, turn it into blood. Now you would think, wow, I mean, if somebody did that in front of me, I would be pretty impressed, right? And yet Moshe turns to Hashem in that back and forth and he says, at first he says, right, when Hashem gives them miracles, he says, they'll believe you. Moshe understood that it's human nature that someone whose faith is based on miracles, he still remains with some doubt. And he starts to think, how did this really happen? Maybe there was some trick here that I'm not aware of. And therefore Moshe says to Hashem, I don't want to go. And he says, they're not going to believe me. So Hashem tells me, you know what, these tricks, these miracles is only for them, it's to tide you over. They'll believe you for now. But you're right, their ultimate faith in you won't be a result of these miracles. But after you leave Egypt, and you'll come and stand at this mountain, at that point, when you stand at the mountain, all doubt will be removed. Any doubt that they may have had will be removed. Because the ultimate sign that I sent you is that when they witness me speaking to you on this mountain, they'll know that I've sent you. They'll know that with absolute certainty, Moshe represents Hashem, and there will be no leftover thoughts of doubt. And this is what the verse says. This will be the sign that I sent you. When you take the Jews out of Egypt, you'll come and serve me on this mountain. That's the moment of revelation at Sinai. So what emerges from this, and to summarize, that any prophet that comes after Moshe, we don't believe in them only because of the miraculous things that they can achieve. So that we can say, oh, if you'll do a miracle, okay, then I'll believe you. Right? The only reason why we believe prophets, and the only reason why they can actually engender our trust in them as a result of some miraculous thing, is not because of the miracle itself, but it's because of the instruction that Moshe gave in the Torah. And Moshe tells us, if a person such as the one that we described in yesterday's halachot, perfect in character and so on. And then he does a sign, Elav Tishmun. Moshe tells us, such an individual you should follow. In other words, why do we believe in prophets and prophecy? Not because of the miracle they themselves perform, but because Moshe has told us that if they fulfill all the other ideals and they can do a sign, then you got to listen to them. And this is similar to the way in which the Torah tells us that you decide a matter in law based on the testimony of two witnesses. Even though we can never be 100% sure that what the two witnesses are telling us is absolutely true. We don't believe someone because of absolute certainty, but we believe someone because this is the criteria that Torah gave us. Two witnesses are believed in a court of law to testify, not because that is the absolute determinant of truth, but that's the system that the Torah has told us to uphold. Similarly, we don't believe in the prophets because they do miracles, but because the Torah tells us that that's someone that you can believe. Right? In a similar way that we are commanded to listen to such a prophet. Even if we can't be certain whether or not the magic, the wonder that they performed was magic or sorcery, or if it's actually a miracle from Hashem. You see over here, obviously, also the critical idea as to why, as Jews, we have rejected. We'll see actually further clarified in Halacha 3. Those who have come forward and through miraculous events tried to gain the trust of the people. But there was one problem. They tried to change the word of Moshe Rabbeinu, and that becomes their undoing. So this is the point he's going to emphasize in Halacha 3. Therefore, if a prophet arises, they get up and they do incredible miracles. But then they ask that we no longer listen to the prophecy of Moshe. In other words, we no longer listen to the instructions of Torah. You don't listen to such a prophet. We'll know we'll know for certain we'll know for certain that those miracles are but witchcraft and sorcery. Again, because if our faith in Moshe was the miracles that he did, so if somebody comes along and says, well, I've got a better trick than Moshe, I've got a bigger miracle than Moshe, well, you might have to listen to that individual. Or you might be inclined to listen to that individual. Somebody comes along and says, I don't split the sea, but I walk on water. Even Moses didn't do that. But then their message is a message that is in contrast to Moshe's prophecy, the Torah. Then we know that that's not a true prophet. Why? Again, we do not have faith in Moshe and his prophecy because of the miracles that he did, and therefore we don't compare miracles. And the reason why we have faith in Moshe is we ourselves saw him. Of his name we saw and heard the communication from Hashem just as he did in those moments at Sinai. And therefore everything else that Moshe relates to us, we know is true prophecy. And again, the Rambam emphasizes the point. It gives us a bit of an analogy. It would be like this: it would be like two witnesses coming along and trying to convince someone that what they see is not actually what's there. You would never listen to those witnesses because you know for certainty what something is. What the Rambam is referring to over here is as follows. The Torah tells us we must trust two witnesses. But we only have to trust the testimony of two witnesses if they are testifying about something that I myself don't know for sure. But if there's something that I myself have seen, and I know it for certainty, and two people come along and they tell me something different, it doesn't matter if it's 2 or 10 or 100 or 1,000. Because I know it to be true, their testimony means nothing. Right? For example, if somebody, I live in Cape Town, right? If somebody describes Cape Town to me and says, there's this beautiful city, and it's this wonderful place on the sea with these flat vistas that go on for miles and miles. So if somebody describes Cape Town to me like that, and I've never been there, okay, that's how I imagine Cape Town. But I live in Cape Town, and I look out my window and I see the mountain as a backdrop to the city. So 1,000 people can come along, or 10,000 people can come along and tell me Cape Town is this flat vista. I mean, you're Meshuggah. I know what the truth is. I see it with my own eyes. You're not gonna change it. So he says the same thing is true. If somebody comes along and does a miracle and says, "Oh, this miracle proves that I'm greater than Moshe," our faith in Moshe was never about miracles. We know that what Moshe says is true because we saw him receiving communication from Hashem. And that's what the Torah tells us. If somebody comes along and performs miracles, like Tishma al but at the same time, they want you to oppose what Moshe said. You don't listen to that prophet. Because this person is trying to trick you with the signs that they're doing, and to confuse what you actually saw yourself. And because our faith is not based on those miracles. So in other words, our faith in the prophet is not in the miracle that they achieved. Our acceptance of the prophet is not because we're impressed by the miracle. Our acceptance of the prophet is because the Torah tells us that this is the sign of how we can know that someone is a true prophet. And because my faith in this prophet is only based on Moshe's word, then if they come to undo Moshe's word, then clearly they're not a real prophet. But how can a wonder impress on us or cause us to accept a person who's coming to deny the very thing or the very prophecy of Moshe, which we ourselves saw and heard? So that brings us to the end of today's chapter. Like I said, it's a relatively short one, but really a foundational idea of understanding what is the basis of our faith in Moshe's word, i.e., the Torah. It's not a blind faith, but it's an experience that we all witnessed. When we say all witnessed, we can turn to the Midrash that says indeed all souls were there. But even if you want to be a little bit more pragmatic or practical, we'll say it was witnessed by our forebears, and they themselves saw and heard and experienced that, and that has been passed down. Our witness report, generation to generation to generation to generation. Our faith is not blind. It's not based on lack of reason, but is very strongly grounded in human experience and the transmission of testimony that lives up to the best possible type of scrutiny. It's as true as anything as we can experience in this world. So I'll stop that there, and